Most gardeners think the immigration crisis is a political story. It's not just that anymore. It's a food supply story, and if you grow your own food, it's about to become your garden story too. The people who pick, pack, sort, and move the seeds, transplants, fertilizers, and amendments that the home gardening industry depends on are largely immigrant workers, and right now that supply chain is getting squeezed in ways that most backyard growers haven't started thinking about yet. The first place you'll actually feel this is at the seed rack, not the border. Seed companies, particularly the small and mid-size operations that serious growers rely on for open-pollinated and heirloom varieties, depend heavily on contract farming operations where the labor force is predominantly immigrant. Seed production is painstaking work, isolating varieties, hand-pollinating, dehybridizing, cleaning, sorting by hand. This isn't automated at scale for specialty seeds. When that labor disappears or becomes unreliable, seed companies reduce their catalog. They drop the slow movers, the niche varieties, the ones that don't justify the overhead when production costs spike. That tomato variety you've been growing for 6 years might simply not be available next season, not because it failed, but because the economics broke. Your fertilizer and amendment supply is more fragile than you think it is. Compost facilities, worm farms, fish emulsion producers, bat guano operations, kelp harvesters, most of these are running on immigrant labor, and the distribution networks that move bulk materials from production sites to regional distributors rely on it even more. If you're sourcing quality inputs locally, a disruption at one processing facility cascades fast. Prices go up before availability goes down, so pay attention to that. When your fish emulsion jumps from $12 a quart to $19, that's not inflation in the abstract. That's the early signal that supply is tightening. For raised bed growers running a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 mix of compost, perlite, and topsoil, the compost component is the most vulnerable. This is the moment to start sourcing a secondary supplier, ideally local municipal compost, horse manure from a nearby stable, or building your own hot compost pile with kitchen scraps and garden waste, not as a lifestyle choice, as a practical hedge. Hydroponics growers are not insulated from this, and, thinking otherwise will cost you. Hydroponic nutrients are manufactured products, but the raw materials that go into them, mined minerals, processed kelp, fish-derived compounds, move through the same labor-dependent supply chains. The bigger issue in hydro is that growing media like cocoa coir and clay pebbles are imported, and import logistics are tangled directly into visa and workforce policy. Cocoa coir comes primarily from Sri Lanka and India, processed by hand, and shipped through ports that are already showing delays. If you run a recirculating deep water culture or a drain-to-waste cocoa system and you've been buying your media run by run, now is a reasonable time to stock an extra bag or two per site. Not panic buying, just a realistic buffer. So, the transplant market is where this is really going to hit home growers the hardest and, honestly, the fastest. Greenhouse operations that crank out millions of tomato, pepper, and herb transplants every spring for garden centers. They're mostly staffed by H-2A agricultural visa workers. Now, H-2A is already under a lot of policy pressure. If those visas slow down or get capped more aggressively, greenhouses get short-staffed and, well, they respond by growing fewer SKUs of transplants. That means you could end up with just 4 varieties of hybrid tomatoes at your garden center instead of, say, 12. So, if you've been relying on buying transplants instead of starting from seed, this season is really the right time to learn to start your own. Starting peppers and tomatoes from seed isn't complicated, but it does take a small setup. You're going to want a heat mat, a good grow light set about 4 inches above your seedlings, and a clean soilless starter mix. For timing, just count back 8 to 10 weeks from your last frost date for tomatoes and 10 to 12 weeks for peppers. That's it. Once you can do that reliably, you're totally insulated from transplant shortages no matter what happens. Honestly, this is also the right moment to start saving seeds seriously for the first time. Seed saving isn't complicated for most vegetables, but it does take some intention. Tomatoes and peppers are self-pollinating and frankly, pretty forgiving for beginners. Squash, on the other hand, cross-pollinate aggressively and need a bit more management. So, start with tomatoes. All you have to do is let 1 or 2 fruits go fully mature on the vine, past the eating stage, until the skin softens. Then, scoop the gel and seeds into a jar of water. Let it ferment for 2 to 3 days to break down that germination-inhibiting coating, then rinse, dry on a paper plate, and store in a cool, dark place. Those seeds will outlast just about any supply chain problem you're likely to face. Growing your own food has always been about resilience, and right now, that word means something really concrete. The gardeners who come through the next few seasons without a lot of frustration are going to be the ones who diversified their seed sources, learned to start from seed, built their own compost, and stopped assuming the garden center will always have what they need. That's not doomsday thinking, it's just how experienced growers have always operated. If this kind of practical, no-fluff information is useful to you, go ahead and subscribe to Gentle Herb Living and share this video with someone in your garden community. The more growers who actually understand what's happening, the better decisions we all make. See you in the next one.